Very briefly before we begin, although there'll be time cards below, we are nearly at 25,000 subscribers. There you can see it, 23,700. And a good proportion of you are likely not subscribed to the channel. So why don't you join us? Head towards one of these two glorious buttons, the red one perhaps, and subscribe. Thank you very much to the channel members as well who support the channel. And without any further ado, let's begin. Dune Spice Wars surprised us with some very exciting news. The official announcement of the 5th faction that will be coming to Dune Spice Wars very soon in the game's next major update. I'll talk more about that later in the video, but firstly, the meat! To save you clicking through too many of the time cards and skipping too far ahead, it's House Corrino. Secrets do not diminish when they are spread among many ears, is their catchphrase. So, in this video, we're going to talk about what they are. What is this house? What should we expect from them? How do they fit in with the lore? And then in the second part of the video, the later part, I'll talk more about the broader setting of Dune Spice Wars. And by that, I mean, when should we expect these updates and how does it fit with the roadmap, the development of this wonderful real-time strategy game? Let's begin. So, who or what are House Corrino? Well, we know a little bit from the lore already, and it's incredibly fascinating. So, allow me to share this with you. Essentially, House Corrino are the Emperor. As the team behind Dune Spice Wars rightly put it in their Steam release, the factions on Arrakis have become unruly, and as such, the Emperor is left with no choice but to make a rare trip to Arrakis, the desert planet where Dune Spice Wars is set, if you don't know, alongside his feared elite military force in order to remind them of his dominion. That's right. As House Corrino, we are playing as the Emperor, essentially. Now, when I was delving into the sort of world of Dune Spice Wars a little bit more, getting into the detail, it became more and more clear to me how this house might play. Now, I should firstly note up front here so that you don't get too confused, we don't have any specific details yet around what units they might have or anything like that. However, we know a couple of things. We know how they fit in with the broader lore of the universe, and we also know what the developers Shadow Games have told us already. They go on to say that playing as House Corrino, players will experience a very different kind of economy to balance. Tip the scales of spice in your favor by receiving taxes or bribes from other factions, while paying off the Spacing Guild's fees to maintain interstellar travel at affordable rates and hold your empire together. Of course, you are the Emperor, the Imperial House Corrino. And it sounds like playing as the Emperor will be tasked with a different thing. Of course, the other players in the game will be paying their spice taxes to us. Those taxmen that come in when you're playing as, say, the smugglers are ours. The Sardaukar are our elite military force. And that indeed actually plays out in a little bit of the lore. If you'll forgive me and allow me to entertain you for a couple of minutes, I think this story will be worth sharing with you because you'll get a feel for how this faction will fit into Dune Spice Wars. So, over a series of millennia, the Imperial House Corrino, again, these guys are at the very top of the empire, a firm grasp over the world, ruled with, as the lore would tell us, divinity. They were the true power, and had the largest vote, or at least a very large vote, over the Landsraad Council. In most cases larger than any other house. Now, they do run into some conflict with Atreides. In fact, the fall of the Empire was through sort of an indirect conflict with Atreides. What happened was, through complacency, inactivity, and corruption vis-a-vis the Roman Empire, and through an eventual weakening forces of their own Sardaukar, that elite military army, a plan was hatched, somewhat ill-conceived, perhaps, in an attempt to discredit Atreides, and I take this information from the Dune Wiki, so do bear that in mind, and to maintain their control, House Corrino, under the leadership of the then Emperor that we'll be playing as in this game, I believe, hatched a plan to dispose of their rival using House Harkonnen as sort of this Cold War pseudo-power conflict. They essentially tried to use their other rival against their third rival to play them off against each other. Unfortunately, while the plan looked to initially succeed, with Duke Leto I of Atreides being unalived in battle, family abandoning the deep desert, eventually a gradual uprising by the Fremen sought to overtook that. I won't delve too much more into the lore because firstly, it's not my strong suit. And secondly, there are probably a lot of other people in the comments who are much more skilled at it than me. So if you'd like to share your thoughts on how House House Corrino might fit into Dune Spice Wars, please do let me know below. But from the story that I've just told you, from being the Emperors, the Almighty, for a very long time, and then running into some difficulties over the long run, the sort of slow bleed of a long expanding empire, combine that with some political difficulties with Atreides and Arrakis being Arrakis, you can see how they might fit in. They might fit in as a house of overall political supremacy, right? Supreme control over the council. I mean, you basically are the council. They'll likely be collecting taxes, of course, rather than paying them, but they'll also likely, even more likely, have their own system of that's sort of keeping them in check, like taxes to be paid. But in this case, as I mentioned earlier, we're likely just sort of paying a different force. I expect them to have a larger vote than any other house. Obviously, at the council, be a very strong political player, likely rivaling Atreides, if not more so. And finally, you would expect their army to be fairly significant as well. Maybe we see a unique blend between, ironically, going from what I've just told you with that lore story, a blend between Atreides, potentially, and House Harkonnen in terms of gameplay mechanics. We'll have to see how that plays out. Now, as of the time of this week ago, a few weeks ago, I believe it was around the 21st of June, they released a patch update. The most recent update, here are the changes on screen. It was an overall sweeping update to the game, really. It rebalanced, it sort of nerfed, tweaked, buffed a lot of the military units, gave a little bit more definition to the houses, particularly House Harkonnen, and added sweeping changes to the map, regions, buildings, all that sort of thing. Now, it fitted in, of course, to the broader roadmap for Dune Spice Wars. Early access. We know that the game will be in early access for around a year, likely coming out of early access in around April of next year, therefore. And we know that looking at the roadmap that I have on screen here, that the update that we received, the multiplayer update, that massive one that added sweeping changes to the game, as well as, oh, did I forget to mention multiplayer? We're now looking forward to the next update. The update that will, of course, include this brand new house that I've just talked about, but also a little bit more than that. And a little bit more than that might be an understatement, because if Shadow Games' history is anything to go by, it'll be much more. We can see that it's expected in summertime, the new playable faction update, the second one expected in the Northern Hemisphere summer, of course. If their update history is anything to go by, we saw the game come out into early access in April. And then we saw following updates in May, and then again that big one in June, which was followed by a number of smaller hotfixes to fix a series of issues and a few tweaks. But my point here really is that their progression has been fast. We're talking roughly one big update a month, maybe 5 to 6 weeks at most, depending on timings. And with a relatively ambitious early access roadmap ahead, a reminder there are further updates. You're welcome to scroll back and take a look, but hinting at all sorts of things, including a variety of new units being added to the game, and an overall stretching of the number of factions, of course, houses that we can actually play in Dune Spice Wars, as well as further game modes. The game has likely a very bright future ahead of it. And I suspect that as we see this new house rolled out, of course, now it's important to note that these future houses and changes aren't just being balanced for single player, but now multiplayer too, since the June 21st update. We should likely expect to see this update roll through. My guess would be sometime towards the end of July, the start of August at the latest. Time, of course, is running out in that summer, European summer time frame. And I will leave you now with one of the most tragic endings in all of Dune Spice Wars history. A vital lesson in why deep desert is vital for supply. I'll see you next time.